I want to start with this quote from Owen Benjamin. Whatever we consent to will grow. Whatever we condemn will shrink. They're in adolescence, so like 13 to 18, it's a 2,000% increase over the last 10 years of girls who identify as trans. And what we're seeing is that it permeates these girl social circles as a social contagion. It's the same way that we saw like bulimia and anorexia in the early 2000s. Yeah. And it's the same way that we saw self-harm permeating these same subgroups in the 2010s. So it's the newest trend, and what it is these girls are searching for a sense of identity.
While we look in the negative light on those things, we also say, hey, you look like you're really going through something here. Guess what? I know where there's this path out. I know where you could actually potentially solve all the problems that led you to this point. And you might not think it's a problem. You might think it's like this is you living your true self and all that jazz. But we actually have a path to freedom here. God is making up the difference for you, because when he looks at you, he sees Jesus. He sees Jesus.
It was that moment, I'll never forget it, that I realized, no, just because my parents go to church or whatever's going on, there has to be something that happens personally between me and Christ.
All right, welcome back to the Life and Faith podcast. On this episode, we're going to be talking about something that I feel pretty strongly about, and that is the idea that the passivity, or maybe even you could say the weakness of some of the Christians, some of the believers, how that has impacted our society and has really been a detriment to us as a whole. I want to start with this quote from Owen Benjamin. Whatever we consent to will grow. Whatever we condemn will shrink. So I have this broken down into 5 categories where I feel like we see the biggest impact of this passivity. And so I'll just go over some stats, some examples, bullet point kind of style, and then we can get into any or all of these topics a little deeper. But I have it broken down into these 5 categories. It's keeping the faith, marriage, culture, abortions, and the LGBTQ movement. Mm-hmm. So keeping the faith, the data that I found went back to 1972, where 90% of the U.S. was Christian, and this was basically the case for all of U.S. history up until that point. Yeah. Fast forward to 1995, it was about 80%, so a little bit of a drop-off. 2010, 75%, again, an incremental drop-off. Between 2010 and 2022, we went from 75 to 63%.
Correlated with the rise of the internet, by the way.
Right.
And then the initial drop-off correlated with, I think, the removal of the Bible out of the schools.
Yeah. In that same time frame, 1970s to 2000, church attendance was 70 to 75%. 2010, it was 60%. This is across all faiths. But obviously we can extrapolate that to Christians, given the percentage that were Christian versus, other faiths. And then in 2020, for the first time in U.S. history, church attendance fell below 50%. It's sitting right around 47%. Moving on to marriage. The marriage rate in 1970, 76.5%. 2023, 31%. Dramatic fall off there. Children born out of wedlock in the 1980s, less than 20%. 1990, about 35%. And in current times, it's greater than 40% of all kids are born out of wedlock. The legalization of gay marriage. This doesn't really make sense to me, because obviously when you look at it from a religious perspective, it goes against God's design for marriage, which is one man, one woman bearing children. And then even from a legal perspective, the state incentivized marriage because it provided for a family. The family is the cornerstone of a society. It's the building block upon which society is built. Yes. And so what is the incentive for the state to regulate gay marriage? Because there is no capacity for a gay couple to bear children. Right. So where does that incentive come from?
Well, I think the argument is that they can't cover each other in insurance and can't will, or is it like a legal thing where a married
There is a
couple would
tax
get tax thing and like all the legal ramifications of marriage they didn't really have.
Sure, I can understand maybe some sort of legal contract that gives you those kind of rights, like, visiting a spouse in a hospital or things like that. Obviously, I don't agree with the lifestyle, but I can understand where it's like, we want to have them on our life insurance or something like that. But to codify it as a marriage and to give those same kind of incentives that you would give to a married couple who are capable of bearing children, that so much doesn't
From a
make...
government standpoint, it doesn't make sense.
Really, and we're talking primarily about the spiritual consequences of such things, as opposed to like the legal aspect or whether it's quote unquote right or wrong to quote unquote support. You know what I mean? So not to take it off the track.
Yeah, no. The reason I mention that is because a lot of people will say, "Well, you only believe that because of your faith," and it's like, well, I can give you purely secular reasons on why it shouldn't be incentivized. Also. So we know that we always hear the statistic 40-50% of marriages end in divorce. If we look at practicing Christians, that rate drops down to about 25%. And if we look at couples who pray together regularly, daily, or consistently, that rate is less than 1%.
Really?
End in divorce, yes, significantly less. Also, it's somewhere in the range of 1 in 1,200 to 1 in 1,500.
That's something that my wife and I have always struggled with. For some reason, there's a nervousness that comes about when we pray together, and I don't really understand it. I mean, I feel it for sure.
It's the first battleground of the marriage.
How are you guys with that? Would you say you're good, bad, indifferent?
We go through different seasons, like depending on which episode that we record, I would tell you a different answer for each episode. That's how much it varies up and down. But absolutely, we could be better about that. And I absolutely see it as like that's where Satan attacks you the most. It's in the little things. Like you wouldn't think about like prayer time, but I think that's absolutely So Koty just said the building block, the foundation of society is families. The foundation of a family is the marriage. And I say this a lot, but children absolutely add to the blessings and it adds to the family. But you are a family before you ever even have children. You and your spouse. That's an important relationship. And like he's saying, it the data goes into it that they stay together more if they're praying. And Satan knows if he's going to get a foothold in the family, it's first and foremost in the couple's prayers.
What about you? You guys pray together? Or?
We always do the bedtime prayers with the kids. In terms of us working, just her and I together, it's something, like anyone, we could probably be doing more often. We do try to do some devotionals now and then. Definitely something we could be more consistent at. But we do spend a lot of time praying for each other. It might not be something where we pray together, but we are praying for each other, praying for our home, for our children. So, yeah, it's, we can always do better. So, but I like to think that we are at least trying to make a good effort there.
Yeah, again, to offer advice no one asked for, I would say after being married for as long as I have, prioritizing those things, like I adore the commitment to the kids, and I think both of you have that in your lives. I've seen you, Josh, reading scripture with your kids and stuff like that, and I'm just telling you, as they get older, they don't gravitate toward it on their own.
Yeah.
You set that tone, and your window for influence for you parents of young kids out there, your window of influence is small.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that my son isn't that I did something terrible here, because he's a faithful believer as I can see. But I did not prioritize those things as we were younger, and boy, I really wish I would have. I mean, you're just not going to get those times back, and you're going to, like I say, they are worth their weight for sure. Worth more than gold.
That's good.
Definitely. Moving on to the culture. So this I don't really have statistics on because it's impossible to quantify something like that, but I do have examples. Obviously, you see in the media now, especially on social media, the prevalence of mocking Christians or the faith as being archaic or outdated. something that's, only dumb people, or, I'm too smart to believe in that. It's an all-time high. It's pretty much the only religion that you can openly mock and face pretty much no backlash on. In the media, there's a lot of satanic imagery. If you're familiar with the artist Lil Nas X, he has a music video where he goes to hell and he gives Satan a lap dance. There's also another music video where he portrays himself as Christ and mocks the crucifixion. Now, a serious Christian society would not tolerate that whatsoever, but now it's like, people are hyping it up and glorifying it and giving it clout, and it's like, to tolerate that is
There's something recently that happened satanic-wise with, like, the United Nations, I think. I'm real fuzzy on it, but it was like a satanic leader or something led in prayer to Satan or something.
Jeez.
And it's like, how much bold-faced can you be?
Yeah.
Well, same thing happened in Iowa, where they had the effigy of Baphomet that they put up in the state capitol building. And the argument was, well, freedom of religion. It's like, well, it's like, what is the doctrine of the religion? Is that something that we should be encouraging or tolerating as a serious society?
Yeah, absolutely. I look at those things like, I would, of course, not want that to be the case, but whenever they do gain a foothold, I just remember, like, hey, you know what? Their knee will bow.
Yeah, that's right.
Their tongue will cease.
One day.
About that Lil Nas X video, I watched that because I was curious, because I thought maybe it might actually make a good episode, And so I watched it. I put it incognito mode, because I don't need that in my life.
Up, yeah.
I don't need that in my life.
Like, oh,
you don't want the algorithm targeting you with that.
Yeah. I took it as I know it did have like it was either a really intense attempt to make Christians angry. It was more like, you know what I mean? It was just kind of like antagonistic. It wasn't really like it was blasphemous, but the theme of the song was just that he's something great.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like how stupid Christians are. Right? I'm attuned to those things,
Ironically, Satan fell from heaven having the same thing. Like, I'm pretty great.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So as I chose not to pursue the evaluation of that song or that video as a reflection of how we as Christians should react to it, because it was nothing new.
Yeah.
It would have been cool if, I say cool, but like it would have been interesting at least if he would have been critical of Christians in some way instead of just talking about what an awesome dude he is.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It was just more like a religious themed self-aggrandizing thing, and
there's not really anything we can combat it with. It's like, that's your opinion.
Yeah, whatever. It's like kind of a shoulder shrug, like, okay, well, I guess we don't really need to.
Well, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about on the earlier episode, where it's like Satan doesn't care if you worship him; he just wants you to not worship God. So if you're all about yourself, that's a win in his eyes.
That's a win.
He's moving on to bigger fish.
Yeah. Another artist, Doja Cat. She's a rapper also, but she just did a music video where she dressed herself as a demon. She had the red eyes put in. She wore this weird bodysuit, had the horns on, doing this weird, creepy imagery, stuff like that. Just very satanic imagery.
Yeah, there's no doubt that our culture, that's ramping up significantly.
Oh, yeah. What's his name? Sam Smith? Him also, where he's like they, them, and he's got this,
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't he do like soft-hearted songs? Doesn't he do like?
Well, listen, one of those songs. He used to. One of these more recent songs that got huge radio play, and the song is about a guy who is married who sneaks out to have a gay affair with somebody.
Jeez.
And it's like this got huge traction. It blew up on TikTok. It had millions of people, children listening to it, and the music video, it just portrays that, and it's just really. It's one of those things where it's like get the foothold and then kind of traverse down that path. Lil Nas X's first video was Old Town Road, where he's talking. It's like a country rap song, and now where is he at? He's mocking the crucifixion.
Which he was always going to do kind of. He always was sort of, even from the beginning, sort of like that, right? He's like the first.
He wants to be in the news, and he's found that is outrage worthy.
Well, you know what I think about a lot when we talk about this is I think about that song "Hungry Heart" by Bruce Springsteen, because it really didn't upset the balance of things too badly. But if you listen to the lyrics of that song, it's all about how I got a wife and kids in Baltimore, Jack. I went out for a ride and I never came back. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Everybody wants to play their part. It's all about how he just leaves his family and goes and finds a better life.
Yeah.
So we also have the proliferation of pornographic material as at an all-time high. 70% of men have watched porn within the last month, 40% within the last week. It's a serious problem. You have young men, 20 to 35, who are experiencing erectile dysfunction as an effect of this, where it's like they're so used to this hyper stimulation of the pornography that real life encounters doesn't have the same effect.
Again, an attack on marriage,
right?
The cornerstone of the family, which is cornerstone of society.
And there's so much hypersexualization of all sorts of content. It's all over social media. I mean, I had to delete apps off of my son's iPad because the ads, it's for a mobile game, and it's got these like very sexually implicit these scenes where it's like it looks like it's something sexual and then it pans out and it's not, but it still has that implication there. And I was like, well, you can't have this if this is what the advertisements on here are going to be. You have the books in the children's libraries. People are pushing back against banning them. Something like All Boys Aren't Blue. Very explicit and graphic details of, like these gay sexual acts, and it's underage people that they're describing. And same with genderqueer. This genderqueer book has actual illustrations of this, and this is in middle school libraries. And there's a huge pushback where they're saying, "Oh, we can't ban books. Banning books is bad." It's like, well, what is the content of the book? Children's TV shows, more and more often we're seeing like gay couples or transgenderism. There's an episode of Blue's Clues. What's the target demographic for Blue's Clues? 5 to 7, 5 to 9.
Yeah.
And in one of these episodes, there's a gay pride parade, and there's a beaver, an anthropomorphized beaver that has had top surgery. And it's like, beavers don't have breasts, okay? Like, why are we doing this? It's just shoehorning this into the culture. They're targeting kids with it.
They're like, we're trying to give kids answers. Well, I'm pretty sure kids aren't asking those questions.
Right, exactly.
Not by themselves.
And by the way, we're also not really big on giving kids books about heterosexual sex.
Yeah, right,
Yeah,
exactly. It's not because it's gay, it's because it's sexually explicit. On top of it, it's gay, but it's like, if this were heterosexual, we also wouldn't want this in school. It's like, we're not targeting you specifically. You know?
Hey, we'll take care of it.
Yeah.
When they have the questions, we'll answer those questions for them.
Yeah, that's that goes into one of my other topics about parental rights, but that's good.
So you see on social media this normalization or even glorification of things like polyamory, sexual hypergamy, where it's like, oh, it's great if you're a guy and you have a ton of sexual partners. That's a good thing. And sex work, where you have teenage girls now who are excited to turn 18 so they can make an OnlyFans, which is really disgusting. And the prevalence of that is so big now. Moving on to the next topic, which is abortions, which, in my opinion, one of the greatest injustices in human history. It's absolutely disgusting that we tolerate this, let alone promote it. 1973 is when Roe v. Wade was passed, or when the court case was settled. The average number of abortions per year, 700,000 to 1 million. Okay, right around the 70s. It spiked up in the 80s. You can imagine these are probably, if you have young girls who are 5 to 10 years old at the time of Roe v. Wade passing, they become, 18 to 24, it spiked up to 1.5 million per year, but it dropped back down to about 700,000 or 1 million. So you might say, well, it's pretty much balanced out, right? Well, the raw number has remained pretty steady, but the pregnancy rates have dropped significantly. In the realm of 40 to 50%, the pregnancy rate has dropped. So while the raw number has stayed pretty much level, the percentage of pregnancies that end in abortion has gone up significantly.
Right, yeah.
So right now in New York City, more African-American babies are aborted than are born each year, which is a huge, talk about a tragedy.
Yeah, there's all these movements, for, Black Lives Matter or whatever. Well, why are they not going after abortion?
Right.
That's the number one killer of black people.
Right.
That's one side of it that they don't really talk about much, is that it's focused on minority.
Yeah, the Planned Parenthood
founder
got its start as a way to attack that
Yeah, Margaret Sanger, is that her name?
Uh-huh.
She was a
Yep.
eugenicist and said
Yep.
specifically that, this is how we control the black population.
Yep.
It's horrible. 45% of all abortion cases occur where the woman wasn't using any form of contraception. So there isn't even an attempt to prevent the pregnancy. This is a fallback. This is a safety net where it's like, well, I'll just do whatever I want. And if I get pregnant, well, I can just kill it. Who cares? And 85% of all abortions are for personal lifestyle reasons. You always hear, well, what about rape? What about incest? That is less than 1% of cases. What about the health of the mother, the health of the child? That's about 10% of cases.
Yeah.
And, also, as an aside, I do not believe there is such a thing as a medically necessary abortion.
Right. Yeah.
Because in my opinion, the baby is going to have to come out either way.
Right.
Okay. You're either going to kill it first and then pull it out, or you're going to make your best effort to keep it alive, protect the health of the mother. The baby is going to come out either way. So you're making the decision, well, we're going to kill it first and then we're going to pull it out.
Yeah.
Or you can make the decision where it's like, we're going to try to preserve this human life and do our best. And if it dies in that, then, we did our best at least.
Yeah. There's even been examples where women have been told by their doctors, and their doctors coming from a slant of their own, saying, you could die from this birth. And then there's been mothers who, through talking it out with other counselors, Christian counselors, have she has decided ultimately, I'm going to follow through with this, and has been perfectly fine. It didn't come out that way. The doctor saying that almost from a legality sense, like if I condone this, then it could come back on me and that kind of stuff. So
Last September, I welcomed my nephew. I was part of the family that was in the room after the baby was born to say hello in the first few minutes of the little guy's life, and there's just nothing like it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Sometimes beforehand it might seem like this is going to wreck my life, but it's actually going to exponentially make your life better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they just, you know what I mean? I mean, I think it's hard to explain, or it's hard to make someone believe that.
Yep.
But just that, I mean, and I'm an uncle.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Which I would argue is the awesomest thing. But as an uncle, I look at that little dude, and I just don't want anyone to say a dirty word around him. I don't want any TV that's not good for him to be anywhere near him. And I'm an uncle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Because I just look at him and I go, I'm going to do everything I can for this little guy. I'm like arm's lengthing him from the terrible things in the world, because he literally makes the world a better place. You know what I mean? And when you look at it, like, these people are going out and saying, well, my really awesome life is going to be ruined by this baby. I think to myself, dude, you don't know awesome.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's a tremendous point, because it's disingenuous of these so-called pro-choice organizations that facilitate these abortions to say we're for a choice. Okay, if you're really genuinely for a choice, and I'm not saying that's necessarily the right stance, but even for that side of it, you would want them to have the most informed decision possible. And they don't encourage that at all. It's like, oh, you want to have an abortion? Let's get that taken care of really quick.
Yeah. And, it used to be the case. It's going down a little bit now, where people are willing to admit that actually it is a baby, and we're making the choice to value the mother, the life of the mother over the life of the child, or the desires of the mother over the life of the child. But it used to be, well, it's just a fetus. It's not a human. It's just a clump of cells. I think it's somewhere in the realm of 88% of biologists all agree that life begins at conception.
Yeah.
And I have yet to hear
increasing.
a valid argument for when life begins, if not for conception. Because we all know that murder is wrong. That's basically, you can ask anybody, atheist, whatever religion, everybody will basically agree that murder is wrong. What is murder? Murder is the unjust taking of another human life. Okay? So we have to define when human life starts so that we can say, okay, is this murder, or is this, terminating a pregnancy, or, a clump of cells? We have to be able to define very rigidly when human life begins.
The language is important.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's all Orwell.
And the only definition that makes sense is at conception. Because at conception, you have a unique human at the earliest stage of development that has its own unique DNA.
Right.
It has codified all of their immutable characteristics, skin color, hair color, eye color, height, all of these things, predisposition towards diseases, all of these things are ingrained in that embryo's DNA. It is a human. All of these terms, the embryo, fetus, all of these, they're just words that describe a certain stage of human development. Okay? Fetus literally means offspring in Latin. So they for a long time tried to make this effort to obfuscate and, it's just a clump of cells. They use this coded language. But now increasingly people are willing to admit, it is a baby, but we're okay with killing it because I want to pursue a career. You're putting the worldly desires of the mother over the life of the child, which is a really dangerous thing.
That's that bold, unabashed attitude that we were just talking about with the culture and the rise of Satanism and all those depictions. It's really the same root.
Well, listen.
I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
No, go
I just
ahead.
wanted to say, when you see people who actually, apart from the abortion issue, get everything they ever wanted in life through a career or through a whatever, vast majority of the time they're like, it wasn't really what I thought it was going to be. I think if you could, like Jim Carrey said, I hope everybody gets their 15 minutes of fame so they can all see it's not what it's cracked up to be.
Sure, yeah.
I think if we're able to show people that whatever that thing is that you think is possible instead of this baby, you will find, if you could see the ultimate conclusion of that, then you would see, okay, when you compare those two things, apples to apples, they don't really want that other life. They want the romanticized version of that other life.
Yeah.
Right.
And they don't realize that true joy, lasting, you know what I mean? It's like, that's so much better than all the career or the success or the fame or the whatever thing, or even not even related to careers, just like this happy, quiet life you think you're going to live.
Yeah. Right.
You know what I mean? It is made so much exponentially better by new life, new children, and things like that.
On that topic, one of the most unhappy demographics of people that exist, highest rates of depression, are single career-oriented women in their 40s. The highest level of dissatisfaction with life is in that demographic who decided, I'm going to pursue a career, I'm not going to have a family, I'm going to chase my goals, whatever. Turns out later in life, when you don't have a family, that really, it starts to dawn on you like, maybe I made the wrong choice.
There's a rise in those women speaking out and saying, this culture lied to me.
Yeah.
I was lied to, and I believed it, and I wish I hadn't.
Going back to the Satanic Temple, they're trying to offer religious protection for abortions because they're referring to it as sort of a ritual.
Yeah,
and
sacrificial.
That is literally what it is. You are sacrificing a child at the altar of self-worship.
Yep.
Phew.
The stuff that was happening in the Old Testament with Molech is happening in America right now. It's the same thing, and that's the way God sees it.
Literally, and it's the biggest tragedy in history, in my opinion. It outpaces slavery. I mean, in America, there were, in the whole course, 1776, or I guess America was founded then. You can go even back to 1619. 1776 to 1863, 90 years roughly. 10 million, some say 20 million slaves. In the last 50 years alone, more than 60 million babies were killed in abortions. In my opinion, that is way worse.
Yeah.
That is way worse. And it is sacrificing your child at the altar of self-worship because you're choosing that what I want for my life, the things that I want to pursue is more important than the life of this child, which I took part in creating. It's all about, we need to give women a choice. Well,
we did.
In 99% of cases, of course, you can go into the rape thing. In my opinion, a baby should not be punished for the sins of his father.
Right.
And there are people who are born of rape who are very grateful for that, and who have gone to live very fulfilling lives. And a lot of them are advocating against abortion because they could have been a victim of that.
Right.
But in 99% of cases, you made the choice. You made the choice when you decided to participate in the action whose primary purpose is procreation. So that's where the choice comes in. The choice doesn't come in once you experience the consequence of that choice and you decide, well, actually, this isn't what I want. It doesn't give you the right to kill the baby.
That's where the point you brought up about the rise in pornography ties in too, because we've distorted this view of that act that it is for self-gratification.
Right.
And then you've caused people to forget about the original intention for that.
Right. Right.
Yeah. When you talk about, I want to just go back to the topic of rape real quick. We did actually do an episode, maybe like our 4th or 5th episode. We talked about the state of abortion and the way culture has accepted it. And when on the topic of rape, we determined, as the host of this podcast, we understand that people have value.
Mm-hmm.
And a person's value is not defined by the circumstances surrounding their conception.
Absolutely.
Right. Yep.
Absolutely. A child should not be punished for the sins of their father. Mm-hmm. Yes, it is a vile thing. And yes, so this is basically one of the only moral arguments that I would even be willing to hear out, okay? Because it is a moral dilemma. It's like, this can be a very traumatic thing, and to carry your rapist child to full term, that can be a traumatic thing. But in my opinion, that it's still not justifiable to kill that child. Right. The child should not be punished because their father was a bad. Like, imagine if, a 2-year-old, their father was a rapist, and it's like, well, we got to kill that 2-year-old now because dad's a bad guy. It's like, that is untenable. It's inconceivable. And yet we think that's fully justifiable if the baby's inside the womb.
Or even like a serial killer, and you say, okay, the court's decided like he gets, the capital punishment, but then saying, well, we also got to get rid of that mom and dad that raised him. Like,
Right.
That wouldn't make sense to us, but that's the same line of thinking that we do when we abort a child.
You get this pushback too, where it's like, oh, you say you're pro-life, but you don't want to take care of the kid once it's out. You don't want to subsidize healthcare. You don't want to, give welfare systems and yada yada. It's like, like you said, the capital punishment. Well, you're pro-life, but you're okay with the death penalty. It's
Right,
like,
right.
Well, there's a difference between literally the most innocent human life that exists.
That can't defend itself.
Right, and somebody who's committed a vile atrocity against humans. It's like, I'm against the unjustified or the unjust killing of an innocent human.
Right.
It's like if somebody breaks into your house and is trying to rob you and points a gun in your face and you kill them, in my opinion, that's fully justified.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you have somebody who committed these vile atrocities, it's like that's way different from a baby who can't defend himself, who by definition is basically the most pure and, unsullied being that could possibly exist.
This side of heaven.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't just compare those two, or you can't. And there was really like 3 or 4 situations there that you just mentioned, but it's like this ain't that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We ain't talking about capital punishment right now.
Right.
We're talking about.
It's an attempt to justify something that, at its core, I believe everyone truly knows this is wrong.
Yeah.
They may deeply bury it.
And a lot of people who are pro-choice, you ask them, well, would you have an abortion? No, I can never do that.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to support the women's right to choose. And this is when we go back to where it's like, the amount of women who are on birth control is higher now than ever. So basically you have a smaller portion of society who are just getting more abortions now. There are people who are in my sphere, acquaintances and things. Like my mom knows a lady who has had 6 or 7. And it's like, oh my goodness, that is inconceivable.
Yeah.
My wife told me a story about somebody she knows that has had a lot of them, and then I won't go into too much detail, but you can tell that it's really weighed on her.
Yeah.
Not that she would admit or that she would actually change her opinion about it, but you can tell like it's not a topic she talks about freely, like deciding to, give up sugar or take up a workout routine. You know what I mean? There's a weight, a gravity to it because in your heart of hearts that you're ending a life.
Yeah. It's another thing that those pregnancy centers that go through with the abortions, they don't even talk about with those women, the effects that it will have, long lasting.
So I have another acquaintance who, when I was a lot more outspoken on social media, she kind of pushed back on me on the abortion thing. And she told me, well, I have a friend who got an abortion, and, this guy, he, said he was going to wear a condom and then didn't, and then she got pregnant and she had to get an abortion, and she was devastated, and it was heartbreaking. And I'm like, are you sure you're arguing for your side? Because it
sounds
to
like
me,
it's
like, do you want to know why she felt that way? Because she knows truly if there was some true self-reflection there, she knows that she just killed her child because there was a bad circumstance surrounding its conception.
You take something bad and made it worse.
Right.
And in the scenarios where, and if you're out there and you're listening and you're facing something that is equally with that kind of gravity and you have to make that decision and you're faced with that today, just know that what the world means for evil, the Lord uses for good.
Right.
Even if you're not a believer, that is still true for you. When you have that situation, you think that the world meant it for evil, like in that scenario where, okay, it wasn't, the guy was dishonest. Maybe it wasn't, maybe it was consensual, but the guy was dishonest, or maybe it was consensual, but the science of the pills or the protection or whatever didn't really work because nothing's 100%.
Yeah.
What the world means for evil, the Lord can use and will use for good.
Right, and that comes from the story of Joseph. Joseph was an individual who lost all of his rights unfairly because he was thrust into that situation where he was sold into slavery. He was thrown in prison, but he remained faithful, and God was with him the entire time. Like you see that constantly. This bad thing happens, but God was with him.
Yeah.
And he had the favor on Joseph. And then Joseph, through all of it, ultimately, it was for that entire area at the time. There was a famine coming, and God set him up to be that person who foretold that it was coming, and then help Pharaoh at the time prepare for it and save that known world. That's why he's kind of a depiction of a picture of Christ, so to speak, because he was used for that. What they meant, and he told his brothers that at the end of it all. He said, what you meant for evil, God meant for good.
So we can move on to this last topic, and then we can circle back to any of these. Last one, the LGBTQ culture, the prevalence of it. So I pulled the rates of self-identified LGBTQ based on generations. So the boomers, which were born 46 to 64, 2.6%. Gen X, 65 to 80, 4.2%. Moderate increase.
4.2% of them identify are transgender.
No, not transgender. LGBTQ. So identify somewhere on that.
4.2%
Can be transgender, but it could be any of
it could be.
That's of all people in the U.S.
Correct.
I'm just trying to think back to those times and how 4%. Yeah, I guess that.
About 1 in 20.
Yeah.
Millennials, 81 to 96. That's 10.2%. So now we're starting to see a big increase. And then Gen Z, which is 97 to 03, 20.8%. So what that signifies to me is that it's not something that you're born into, because if that were the case, the argument is, well, society is more accepting now, so more people are comfortable with coming out. But we don't see, as society has become more accepting, that boomers are now coming out and living their true self, as some would say. Or you don't see Gen X doing this, where you see, okay, it was 6% or 4%, and now it's 7% or 8%. If this were truly the rate was 21% and people were just in the closet, you might not see everybody come out, but surely you would see some rise from 2.6%. You know what I mean? Surely there would be some increase of people saying, okay, it's okay now for me to live my true life, or however you want to put it, but that's not what we see. What we're seeing is this huge increase gradually across the generations, but we're not seeing it the farther back we go. So that to me signifies that it is something that's cultural. And, there is some evidence that in vitro exposure to certain hormones might have some sort of link to proclivity towards homosexuality. But by and large, in my opinion, a lot of it is having to do with the culture, the incentive.
Yes.
If somebody comes out as trans, what happens? It's like you're applauded. It's like, oh, you're so brave. You get a lot of social clout that comes along with it. I know people personally who have gone through this phase where it's like, it's somebody who wasn't necessarily popular in high school, didn't get a lot of attention, didn't have a lot of friends. They came out first as bisexual, and then there's this, good for you, we're all here for you, yada, yada. Well, that's not cool anymore. Now they come out as transgender.
Yeah.
Well,
whatever's the latest.
Yeah, I'm a girl now, and it's like they make no effort to adjust their appearance. They still have a beard. They don't change their voice. They just make this claim like, I'm a girl now. And now you have these people who, prior to this, would have paid them no mind, no attention, giving them, no friendship or community. And now, they're posting on their Instagram, oh my goodness, you're so beautiful. You're so brave. Look at you. I love that dress on you.
They're getting what they want.
Exactly. It's a social gratification kind of thing.
Let me say something real quick to speak to that. I heard a stat recently. I think it applies to what you're saying. Like, there's an incentive now for people to identify that way. And so in 2023, a study showed that 53% of Gen Zers believe becoming an influencer is a reputable career choice and would quit their current job if they could become an influencer.
Oh, yeah.
So there is more than ever a desire to be an influencer. Now, pair that with what you were just saying. I can personally vouch for this because our podcast, we created a YouTube channel to post the videos. Where I upload the videos, there's something called YouTube Studio. There's a thing at the top that's beckoning for creators to say, hey, let us know, reach out to us, our YouTube, whatever, like, I can't remember the team, the support team or whatever.
Or data mining thing.
Let us know if you are LGBTQ.
Yeah. And
essentially saying there's an incentive at place that we'll reach out to you. We could even call you out to California and have you help you kick off your channel. If 53% of Gen Zers want to be an influencer, all those people are saying, man, if I really want this is the easiest way. This is the quickest way to fame.
Yeah, I told you should say that you are.
Yeah.
Just so we can get...
So in the last 5 years, the rates of transgenderism among youth has doubled in the last 5 years. And it's so this used to be something that you would only see or almost only see among men. And it was broken down. This was very, very clear science up until it became politicized.
The age range you're saying?
No. I'm saying the...
just gender-wise.
Gender-wise, right.
Okay.
So it used to be only in males. And it broke it down into two categories, where it was effeminate gay men who were basically trying to trick straight men. Mm-hmm. And then the other category was people who have this, it's a fetish called autogynephilia. It's basically men who are aroused by the idea of dressing as a girl. Mm-hmm. So it's a fetish, and this was very rare. So we see the rates of men who identify as transgender has gone up significantly, but the rates in girls... They're in adolescence, so like 13 to 18, it's a 2,000% increase over the last 10 years of girls who identify as trans. And what we are seeing is that it permeates these girl social circles as a social contagion. It's the same way that we saw like bulimia and anorexia in the early 2000s. Yeah. And it's the same way that we saw self-harm permeating these same subgroups in the 2010s. So it's the newest trend. And what it is these girls are searching for a sense of identity. They're searching for acceptance and inclusion. It's a very difficult time.
Many times don't have a good relationship with their fathers.
Exactly. You know, so they're looking for some sort of validation from their community. And right now, this is how you get it. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's why we see this dramatic rise. And this is why we see, you know, one girl will come out as trans. I go by they, them, or, you know, my name is Aiden now or whatever. And then the whole friend group is the same way. You know, it congregates in these little bunches. And that's the reason, is because it really is a social contagion, at least for the girls. For the guys, there may be some more psychological things to it, you know, the fetishizing of it, which I think is horrible. It's like where they make you call them by their pronouns or call them by their new name. It's like, I have a fetish and you have to participate in it. Yeah. Otherwise, you're a bigot, you know? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we see like things like the gay pride parades where people are performing lewd acts. They're half naked, BDSM gear, and there's children. Yeah. There's children at these parades, and these people are half naked or even fully naked in some cases. And you know, they have these people walking on the floor with dog costumes and collars, and it's like, you know, what is going? How are we tolerating this? Yeah.
It's a protected class, so they can get away with what other people couldn't.
You have Drag Queen Story Hour. Drag in and of itself is a sexual thing, okay? It's a burlesque show, essentially, and it's men dressing up as women, and there are a lot of people who are drag queens who are coming out and saying, you know, this is something that we do, but this is not something that should be targeted at children, you know, and they get pushback too. But these are people who do this, and they're saying, this is not for children. This is an adult act. This is basically a burlesque show. This should not be something that we should be showing to kids. Okay. And then the one thing I really want to touch on. So we know the gay pride flag, okay? The rainbow flag. Mm-hmm. So we know the rainbow initially was God's promise to man to never flood the earth or to never destroy humanity. It was red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, 7 colors, right? God's perfect number. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what they've done is they've taken that, they've co-opted it. How many how many colors are on the gay pride flag?
6.
Well,
Six.
it would be 6, but are we talking, maybe you're going to go into that, but isn't it amended now?
Yeah,
There's
they have the
addition.
newer. Yeah,
And I just want to say they tried to co-opt it.
they tried to
yeah.
but that's what they're doing. Okay, so
In time period
That's
of
the
grace,
yeah.
they've co-opted it. But
So evil cannot create; it can only corrupt or destroy. Okay, so they've taken this, which is supposed to be a symbol for God's love and the redemption of man. Okay, and they've tried to co-opt it. They've bastardized it, changed it from 7, the number 7, God's holy number, to 6, which is the number of the enemy.
Yep.
Right.
oh, I never noticed that.
Yeah.
Right. And
6 and 7, those are significant. Yeah.
and now, what do they use it for? They use it as a sign of pride in sexual degeneracy. So this is like a complete bastardization of something that is holy. And like you said, it's been amended now. And it's funny that you bring that up, because the amending that they've done, where they added like the black and brown colors and all of this stuff, it's because, it's not necessarily about just the being gay now. It's all of these social issues that they tie into each other, and it's basically anything we can do to subvert the Christian values. You know what I mean? Where, we have to separate black or brown people from white people. We have to make that significant distinction when it's like, well, if you're a follower of God, all humans are equal in his eyes. We're all God's children. And, nobody is beyond redemption. The difference here is, people will say, well, you hate gay people, or you hate this or that. It's like, we don't hate them. We just are against the action, right? So there's this idea that Christians are never supposed to judge. And I would contend with that, saying we shouldn't judge people, but we absolutely should judge the actions.
Well, while we look in the negative light on those things, we also say, hey, you look like you're really going through something here. Guess what? I know where there's this path out.
Yeah.
I know where you could actually potentially solve all the problems that led you to this point, and you might not think it's a problem. You might think it's like this is you living your true self and all that jazz. But we actually have a path to freedom here.
Yeah. So my point with all of this is basically that as Christians, we've become so passive and so tolerant to the point of our own detriment. Now, yes, we should love everyone. We should call everyone to Christ. But we have to be firm we have to be convicted in the fact that we are given a guidebook on morality. We know what is right and wrong. And while we should love others, while we should invite them to participate in the union with Christ, we also have to stand up against things that we know are evil. And exactly what we consent to will grow, what we condemn will shrink. We need to be more bold in condemning things that we know are wrong, and we need to be more bold in consenting to things that are holy.
Okay, so you got me thinking about this, because we were talking about the difference between 6 and 7, the pride flag. Well, you talked about how there's a new one now, and I was like, how many colors did that add? So I looked it up. There's 5 that were added to it, so that makes it 11. I was like, well, what is the meaning of the number 11 in the Bible? When I looked it up, it says, the meaning of the number 11 is important, that it can symbolize disorder, chaos, and judgment.
Ooh. And we don't want to get too far into numerology, but isn't it?
Yeah,
isn't it
take
interesting?
it with a grain of salt. But it's just, it's such a coincidence, at least.
It's not something that we might want to get into, but it's definitely something that was intentional on their end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a reason there aren't 7 colors on the original gay pride flag.
And God was intentional with these numbers too. Right. So I don't know necessarily that we can bank too much on the correlation there, but he's right. Like, they are intentional, and God is intentional about numbers.
So I think we've done a great job here of pointing at things. You know what I mean? And we talk a lot about these different things over the course of the 50 or so. We're almost to 50 episodes. We've talked about a number of these things. I believe one of the strongest things we can do as believers is we can know the issues and vote appropriately. Now, some people will say that voting doesn't really matter, but I contend that it does matter, because so many people work so hard to lie to you, to deceive you into voting for certain specific things. What are some other things that you guys see that Christians can do? I mean, what do you think is so it's like, we have these issues, we can put them up on the wall, and we can say, point to these, this. what can we do today with the presence of mind that we have? In Josh and I's case, we started this podcast, right? That's one thing we did. We're
Speaking
all
truth.
Yeah, we're in leadership positions at church to help to further the gospel. That's another thing. Not everybody does that. Some people are just workaday Christians and they don't really necessarily feel the call to sort of have a podcast or say things. So what do you guys think? What's something that believers can do with the presence of mind they have today to sort of further? You mentioned.
Can I preface your question, because I think it's a really good question, but I want to take it from this angle too. I don't know whether these episodes are going to fall, but if you haven't, so Koty, this is his topic that he's bringing, and we're kind of commentating on it. But Koty's an earlier episode we recorded, at least chronologically speaking, I don't know where they'll fall when Dan releases them. But if it's available, go and listen to Koty's testimony, because in his testimony, he talks about how he used to have all these liberal viewpoints, but he's since changed. And I guess paired with what Dan is saying about what we can do, I guess speaks sort of to what happened in your life to get you to see differently on these issues you just talked about.
Yeah, so really what it was is I started exposing myself to content that was counter to what you would call the narrative. So I spent a lot of time, I would look on Reddit for my news, or I would go to these media outlets and read all of this, which is basically, it's a big propaganda machine. They have this narrative they want you to believe, and they kind of shoehorn you into this one belief system. And it's somewhat like a religion, this wokeism kind of thing, where it's like, it's all or nothing. You can't be, on one side of one issue and the other side of another issue, because that's basically in their eyes heresy. You have to fall lockstep with every single one of these beliefs, whether it be climate change or Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ, abortions. It's like if you're not lockstep with every single one of these, then that's a sin, basically, in this new quote unquote religion of wokeism. So for me, the big thing was seeking out information that was counter to the narrative, and really analyzing my own belief system and looking at it with the sort of scrutiny that doesn't typically happen if you live inside that bubble of the narrative. So I think as Christians, something that we can do is be a source for that counter narrative, to put out what we believe, but also why we believe it. We have to be bold in saying, there's a reason we believe these things. And it's not just because, we don't like this group of people, or, we think we're so much better than these people. It's like, no, we're not better than anyone.
Right.
Okay?
Or we're trying to hold on to a bygone era.
Yeah. Right. And it's like the difference between us and somebody who lives in that is repentance. Okay. You have pride in the sin, and we have repentance. It's like, don't get me wrong, I sin all the time. I fall short of God every single day. But the difference is I have guilt in that, and I have repentance, and I seek to be more like Christ.
Right.
The difference being, these people, they're bold in their in the way that they turn away from Christ. Right. They have pride in that.
One embraces their sin, and the other chooses to turn away from the sin.
Right.
That's repentance. The repentance literally means to change your mind, to turn away.
Well, something we talk about somewhat frequency lately is, you actually don't have a right to possess your sin. He bought it with a price, and he bought it to take it from you. It is no longer yours. You are a new creation in him.
Yeah.
And it's not my sin. Right, I'm in a sin-fallen world, and I contend with these things, and I struggle with these things. But he bought that sin from me.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. I took
paid
on
too high a price.
Too high. It was free to me.
To hold on to it,
but it costs a bunch. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's basically our role as Christians: is we need to stop being so passive. We need to stop. We get to the point where we're tolerant to a fault, and we've allowed these things in our culture to take place. Like I said, it's completely inconceivable that we would allow something like a rapper going to hell and giving Satan a lap dance to be a prominent cultural piece. This should be something that should be condemned wholly. Imagine if something like that came out in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
The 50s. People would absolutely berate it, and it would get no play, no traction. It would be condemned wholly, right? Yeah. But that's not the case now. Now, and I think a lot of it too like I said, my parents were passively Christian, where they believed in God, they believed in Jesus, but they never really instilled those values. And I think it's so important that if you are a believer, you need to pass that along and be bold in that with your family.
Yep.
You really need to speak about that. You have to have these faith-based discussions. You have to raise your family knowing Christ. Otherwise, this is why we are where we're at. We're 63% of the United States versus 90% for the rest of the U.S. history. This dramatic fall in the rates of Christianity in America, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that people just really got lazy.
Yeah, I think people were like, I'm a person who lives in America, and I am a person who believes in the Constitution, and I am a person who goes to church, and I am a person who works for a living, and those things are all good, but it's like that sort of became a line on a resume or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Where
Yeah.
it was just like, I'm a person who does this.
Yeah.
It doesn't really, you can't find, maybe there's a little bit of meaning there, but it's not like a real, like a passion that I just have to do. Like if I personally was to leave the earth and go to the moon, I would still be a Christian there,
Mm-hmm.
and I would still be worshiping the Lord from wherever I was, as opposed to like, well, I'm a Christian on Sunday, and then, on Monday I'm a worker and I'm a father and all this stuff. And it's like, you know what I mean? It's like I don't want to say clock, like not punching a clock, but it is kind of like, it's a hat I wear.
Yeah. I would say, going off of what Koty was saying about it has to be taught and it has to be passed down to the next generation. That was the ultimate downfall of Israel. You see it in the time of the judges after Joshua, even though Joshua's like, if you live your life and teach your children this way, God will bless. And he literally laid it out for them. If you don't, here's all the bad things that will befall you. And they said, Lord our God is our God, in whose voice we will obey. And they committed to that, but Joshua passed away. They turned away from God. A judge came on the scene. They turned back to God, but then they fell away. From generation to generation, they always struggled. And they were more dependent upon a leader than they were of being leaders in their own homes to their own families. And that happened in the time of the exile, after David, after the kingdom split. You've got the two, they were divided kingdoms. There was the northern and the southern kingdom. The northern basically had no just kings at that point. There were some good ones that came onto the scene in the southern kingdom before the exile happened. But if you notice, like, if you just go and study the kings, like, you'll have one bright spot there in the king, but then his son was just, like, more wicked than most. And it's like, how does that happen? Like, you had everything, like, you were a good leader, you could see the fruit in his life, but you could not see that fruit translate to his son's life. And that should be a warning to America. Like, yeah, I would love it so much if in the next 10 years there was just a tremendous revival, and I believe it can happen, to where we go back to the things of Christ. We have that moral compass again for the country. We go back to the Bible. But listen, even if that does happen, we're one generation away from losing it and going right back to where we are today.
That's right.
So it has to be a generational thing. And on that note, I also want to say, kind of to answer your question, Dan, what we can do right now, I do see, like we talked about at the beginning of this episode, there is a ramping up of evil culture, if you will, but I do believe that there are people who are rallying to the cry of there needs to be more truth. There's more. It's not just us in this podcast sphere. There's lots of other people doing the same kind of thing, and some have tremendous success. I've watched some recently on YouTube, and I've even tried to organize my YouTube news feed, like who I'm subscribed to. I've thrown out some of the junk, if you will, the fluff that I had in there that maybe I enjoy for entertainment, and I said I want to be a little bit more intentional about what I view on YouTube and support some of these groups that are doing like what we're doing and trying to speak truth. And I think getting behind other Christians that are doing that, having an appetite for the truth, our category, if you will, of Christianity should not be your least prioritized thing on YouTube. It shouldn't be like after all your hobbies and other interests. I'm not saying anything is wrong with those things. It's just hunger most for truth and let that consume your time of what you consume rather than other things. And to further pound this truth home, I guess, if you will, for us personally, Dan mentioned a little bit of this, but we are leaders in our church yes, we're serving a leadership capacity, but that's actually happened since back in May of 2023 when we started this podcast. Both of the positions that you and I are in now, Dan, have taken place after we started this podcast.
That's true.
And I'm not necessarily correlating those, but I know for a fact that God will bless faithfulness. And here's a phrase that I've heard said, and I've repeated it to myself throughout my life. If you will be intentional about deepening your ministry that God has given you right now, God will then widen your ministry.
Ooh.
Deepen your ministry, and he will widen it. And I truly believe that that's what's happening in our personal lives, even with this podcast, as we see more and more people view it. I see that he's given the increase, and we're just lifting him up and just praying that it will be used in people's lives as they hear it. Thank you for listening to the Life and Faith podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review on your favorite platform, and sharing it with friends and family. Your support helps us continue spreading the gospel of faith, hope, and love. Connect with us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many others to stay updated on our latest episodes. See the link in the show notes for all our social media channels. And until next time, it is our hope you'll commit yourself to an even deeper life in faith.